In many business organizations, managers like to think themselves that they are very calculative and very logical decision makers. Okay, so in other words, they are rational decision makers. And indeed, general experts argue that managers should try to be as rational as possible in making decisions. Now, in this section, we are going to talk about the fundamental and rational perspectives on decision making. Now, the first one is the classical model of decision making. Okay, so the classical decision making model is a very, prescriptive approach. It tells managers how they should make decision. It really is based on the assumptions that managers are logical and rational, and that they make decisions that are in the best interest of the organization. Okay, so in this figure, we show that the classical model views how the classical model views the decision making process. Okay, so you see that when faced with a decision situation, managers will have complete information about the decision situation and possible alternatives. Okay, so basically, this is the classical model's assumption that whenever there is a decision situation, a manager should have complete and perfect information. They should remove all the uncertainty and they should evaluate everything rationally and logically. Okay, and basically they should end up with a decision that best serves the interest of the organization. Okay, so basically it shows that the classical model views the decision making process as a process where the decision makers have complete information about the decision situation and possible alternatives. They can effectively eliminate uncertainty to achieve a decision condition of certainty, and they can evaluate all aspects of the decision situation logically and rationally. But in as we move on with the lecture, we will see that this is actually a very rare situation. Okay, in reality, this is not possible to obtain complete and perfect information, or to eliminate all the uncertainty, or to evaluate everything in a very calculative manner. Okay, we cannot justify everything logically. So the classical perspective of decision making have certain flaws, but still we will move on with learning the rational decision making process, because in organization this is a manager who really wants to approach a decision rationally and logically should try to follow the steps in the rational decision making process. So let's look at that process. Rational decision making process is a 6-step process. Okay, so these steps in rational decision making helps the decision maker to focus on facts and logic, and they also help the managers guard against inappropriate assumptions and problems. Okay, so the first step starts with recognizing and defining the decision situation. Okay, so you first recognize and define the situation. That means what? That means you need to pinpoint the situation where a decision must be taken. Something in your business activity is going to tell you that a decision situation is there. You must take a decision, okay? Whether it is a positive stimuli or it is a negative. And what does that mean? It means whether it is a problem or it is an opportunity, you must have a vibe or understanding of something that is telling you that a decision must be taken, okay? The second one is identifying alternatives. That means when you know that there is a decision that you have to take, you have to find out the alternatives. Okay, you can do that in many ways. You can make a list of alternatives, you can brainstorm, but you have to find out all the alternatives that is there. So you have to create both obvious and creative alternatives that are desired. And in general, the more important the decision, the more alternatives you should be considering. Okay, and the third one is evaluating alternatives. That means each alternative is evaluated to determine its feasibility, how much satisfaction it gives you, and what are the implications or consequences of that decision. Okay, so you have to evaluate each and every alternative. Okay, so if we move on to the first one, that when we are recognizing and defining the decision situation, okay, so you are basically looking for a stimulus, right? So we have to understand a situation. Now the example for this can be that a plant manager sees that employee turnover has increased by 5%. Okay, so when he looks into his business activities and when he looks into his reports, he finds out that in his factory the employee turnover, okay, that means people leaving the organization, has increased by 5%. Now this is a problem. Why is this a problem? For two reasons. One is that you are suddenly going to face shortage of labor, and that will, create problems in the factory floor. You will have to make people work overtime, which is going to increase your cost, and at the same time there is a chance of not meeting the deadline. Okay, and the second problem is that when your employees are leaving the organization, it actually creates a bad image in the market. Okay, you are going to be termed as a bad employer, and that will, move away, or that will not attract many skilled or talented employees. Okay, if you have a bad reputation as a bad employer, then it will actually shoo away your the good talents from the labor market. So that is another problem. So once you know that the turnover rate has increased, you have to identify the alternatives, right? You have to find out what you can do about the situation. So you make a list of things that you can do. So the plant manager can either increase the wage of the individual labor, they can either increase benefits, or they can change hiring standards. Okay, so basically these are the three options that they have: increasing wage, increasing benefits. What does benefit mean? The additional perks that you give to an employee other than the salary. It can be bonus, it can be performance bonus, it can be your insurance, it can be, health expenses, or it can be education for the children. So other extra things that you give your employees for motivation. And you can change your hiring standards. That means maybe you are not doing the job right. In the recruitment process, maybe you are doing something wrong, that you are not being able to choose the right kind of employees who are going to stay with your organization. So that can be a problem. So once you have the list of alternatives, you are going to evaluate those alternatives about their positives and negatives. Okay. So when you are going to increase the benefit, okay, you'll see that increasing benefit will actually increase the organizational cost to an amount that may not seem very feasible. Okay, you may not find it feasible, that increasing benefit is not a good choice. If you look into increasing wages and changing hiring standards, this may satisfy all the conditions. So you move on to, in step 4, you have to select the best alternative. That means now that you have the two alternatives that you think are going to satisfy the situation, you are going to choose the one that actually fits into the manager's situation, or that actually is an effective decision. Okay, so once you do that, you the example in this case is that changing hiring standard will take an extended period of time to cut turnover. Why? Because if you see that your recruitment process is flawed, you see that you're not being able to hire the right kind of employees, you are choosing the wrong people, and that is why they're not motivated and they're not staying in the organization, and you change the entire recruitment process, the standard of how you are going to evaluate a candidate before hiring. Now that is a very lengthy process. Why? Because you first have to revise the policies, then get approval, then you have to implement that, and once you hire the new people, you have to train them, and after a considerable time, you will be able to see whether their performance meets, this. So that is something that is actually not very feasible. It is a lengthy process. You can do it, but if you need an immediate solution, maybe increasing wage is the right decision. Okay. So once you have decided and chose the decision that you want to go ahead with, you implement the chosen alternative. That means you actually try to make it into a reality. Okay? Now what can you do in this case? The example shows you that the plant manager may need permission from corporate headquarters. The human resource department establishes a new wage structure. So this is something that you can do immediately. Okay, so out of all the three alternatives, that increasing benefit or hiring, making changes in the hiring standard or increasing wage, you have selected the best alternative as increasing wage. And once you have taken that decision, you have tried to execute it. You have tried to make it, successful or successfully implement it right away. So as a plant manager, you have taken permission from the corporate headquarters and you have given those approval to the human resource department, and they have established a new wage structure. So that is something that might motivate the employees. Now, once you have implemented the decision, your job is not just finished there. Okay, you have another thing, something very important to do, and that is following up and evaluating the results. Okay, that means your job is not only up to making the strategies, implemented. Okay, but you have to also follow up and see whether or not your implemented plan is actually giving you the desired result. Okay, because when you are implementing a plan, you are basically having some expectation that this plan is going to give you certain level of satisfaction or certain level of performance that you're expecting from this plan. So once you have executed the plan, you are going to come back and see whether at some point in future you will see for sure that this plan was actually successful or not. Okay, so what the plant manager can do in this case, the plant manager notes that 6 months later turnover has dropped to its previous level. That means that it was actually moving to an alarming rate of 5%. After 6 months of increasing the wage, the employees got motivated and the turnover rate got back to its normal percentage. Maybe it was 2.5%, maybe it was 3%, but it was a lower rate, and the manager could see that he actually made a right decision. Okay, so this is the 6 steps in the rational decision making process. You first start with recognizing the problem, then you find out the alternatives that are possible, then you evaluate each of those alternatives about their pros and cons, and then you select the best alternative that meets all the conditions that you are looking for, and then finally you implement the chosen alternative, and the 6th step is you follow up and evaluate the result. Okay, so these are the steps in a rational decision making process. In today's lecture, you have learned about why decision making is important and in which managerial functions we basically conduct decision making. And now you know that decision making, even though it starts with planning, but it also is done in organizing, leading, and controlling. You have also learned about the definition of decision making and that decision making can be both programmed and non-programmed. We have also discussed that decision making conditions are of 3 types. You can take decision under a certain situation, you can take decision under risk, and you can also take decision under an uncertain situation. And then you have learned that there is a classical model of decision making, which is a pretty structured decision making, and that is based on assumption that decision making can be done with complete and perfect information, and the managers knows how to eliminate all the uncertainty, and finally they can come up with a decision that satisfies the manager's conditions. And you have learned the rational decision making process, which is a 6-step process starting from recognizing the problem, identifying alternatives, evaluating alternatives, and then selecting the best alternative. Once you have done the selection of the best alternative, you implement, and then you finally follow up and evaluate. Okay, so let's keep our lecture up to this part, and we are going to continue from here in the next lecture. Have a good day, all of you.